Can you fill in some of those blanks for us, what those hidden costs might be?
Yeah, for sure. I think hidden costs can range from.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Holly Mullin, and I am the managing partner at Sterling Law Offices. I have with me today a special guest, Nikole Messerschmidt. Attorney Messerschmidt is a senior partner in our Madison office. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nikole.
Thanks, Holly, for having me. I appreciate it.
And we are going to be talking about hidden costs in a divorce. There are some hidden tabs that may come their way in helping prepare a client to know what those fees might be, to prepare them for what it might cost and when those costs may come up. I think is a huge service we can provide them, is giving them that information up front so they can anticipate it. So can you fill in some of those blanks for us, what those hidden costs might be?
Yeah, for sure. I think hidden costs can range from small costs, such as, court filings, right? In order to initiate a divorce, for example, that is a cost associated. There's a cost associated with that. Or, experts needed in your case, such as a business valuation or appraisal on your home. Or if custody and placement is in dispute, perhaps a guardian ad litem needs to be appointed. And that is an additional cost that, at least for our firm and probably most firms, is not included in that fee.
Right. I know that you and I have had prior podcast sessions together where we talked about the difference between hourly attorneys versus flat fee attorneys. The prior firm that I was with was an hourly firm. And I know we charged everything from long distance phone calls to copying charges, filing fees, mileage in a vehicle. I mean, all of that was in the hourly firm that I worked for. All of that was transferred onto the client to have to pay for. Um, Whereas I know with flat fee, we have at Sterling, we include some of those. What do we include, Nicole?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, calls and communication are included. The initial court filing and serving an individual, for example, is included in our fee. Travel to court hearings, mileage, all of that's included in our fee, for sure.
Yep. And really, I don't think it's uncommon, whether flat fee or hourly, that these third parties that you referenced, those are going to be out of pocket to the client, meaning that those are often even separate contracts altogether, right? If they're hiring an appraiser, if they're hiring a CPA, or if they're hiring a guardian ad litem, those experts have their own fee structures that the clients themselves will engage in so that they have an understanding of what the cost will be.
Right, exactly. I would assume also in hourly billing, right? Like if the firm is fronting that cost, the client is still getting charged for that, right? So sometimes, in other firms, it's just a direct pay by the client instead.
Yep, good point. So when do these fees typically come up? Is there a typical?
I guess it is typical. It depends, right? And that's such an attorney answer, and I hate giving it, right? But it really depends on the case and the facts and circumstances surrounding it. I mean, if you have a divorce and someone's staying in the house, then appraisal is likely going to happen or need to happen, right? If there is a dispute on custody and placement, that seems to go a little bit further than just simple negotiations to reach resolution, more likely than not, a guardian ad litem will have to be appointed. So I think that even at the initial consults, just getting a sense from the client about these things will give the attorney some indication of where their case might be headed, so that there could be some discussion, at least at the outset, of these potential costs that the client may have to incur additionally from, the attorney's fees.
Understood. Great points too. So is there like a standardization of these fees? Is there anything that's like set in stone that you can say to a client, if you get, this service, it's going to be this exact dollar amount? Or are you thinking more in terms of ranges?
Yeah, great question. I think probably more so ranges, maybe like a court filing fee, right? You could predict because that's set, but more often than not, when you're hiring an appraiser or a guardian ad litem, they all have different ranges and fees. I think you can give an approximation based on the area and maybe your knowledge, right, of what that cost would be, but it's not going to be like dollar for dollar specifics.
And I know we've had this question from clients time and time again, and it won't stop. When can you make the spouse pay for some of these fees? Because sometimes clients say, well, why should I have to pay for this, home appraisal or this guardian ad litem? And what are usually your answers when somebody says, am I going to have to pay a portion of this?
I think again, it depends, which is not a great answer always, but a lot of times if if you're going to jointly do an appraisal, right, you can always ask. It doesn't mean that they're going to be agreeable to it, but sometimes joint appraisals are appropriate. Sometimes different counties, the courts require the parties to split the cost of an expert. So it really just depends on the area that you're in with your case. The guardian ad litem, in my experience, more often than not, is split equally or in some portion, depending on the parties' incomes. Between the parties, it's usually never solely on one person. So I do think there's many times that these significant third-party fees are split to some degree between the parties. And I guess at the very least, there is always a potential for argument in final property division, for example, in a divorce, to be able to maybe recoup some of those funds.
Right. Yep. Same. That's exactly what we experience in the Milwaukee area as well. Sounds like very similar to what you're experiencing in the Madison area. Can you
Right.
give us any examples? I mean, you've been doing divorce work for a long time. Any examples of cases where you've had to deal with a number of these?
Yeah, I think it comes up more often than not, and I think that's why we try to address them the best that we can at the initial consultation. I think custody and or placement disputes happen a lot of times in divorces, and that a case with that involved, which would be additional guardian ad litem fees, or even in a lot of counties a case study, right? Those are additional costs. In addition to on the finance side, while the placement disputes are happening with these third parties, an appraisal might need to be done. If there's a business involved, that might be an appraisal that needs to be necessary. And sometimes business appraisals can cost, $10,000, for example, which is a lot, and especially up front, but could have a lot of gains, if done appropriately and in the right way, right? So I think if a case that seemingly is simple needs these valuations completed, or pension valuations, right? To be able to determine the actual value of assets, to be able to sit down with your client to have a good conversation of what can we put forth as a settlement proposal or respond to a proposal. You need these things before that can even happen.
I think that's a great point that maybe people don't really think about is a cost benefit analysis, right? Is are we let's spend some money to get you a better result. Like I don't know. I'm not a home appraiser. Like you're about ready to essentially sell, right, your house to your spouse to be bought out of your biggest asset, and you're guessing on the value. Wouldn't it be worth, the 400 or 500 bucks to bring in an appraiser and to make sure that that number, that sticker price is the right one? Like, because I've had situations where clients were saying, well, the tax bill says the house is worth 320. So I'm fine with that. And I say, are you sure? Because it's a pretty hot market right now. Getting an appraisal is going to be, let's just call it $500, on the high end. And let's make sure. And then sure enough, that house comes in at 400. Well,
Yeah.
that's an extra $80,000 of equity. Was it worth the $500 investment? You bet. I mean,
Yeah, always.
you have those exacts. You could probably say the same thing with, you mentioned business evaluations or bringing in a guardian ad litem to potentially get a better custody and placement outcome for your client.
Yeah, for sure. I think also it's important to note that's, the guardian ad litem may be a necessary next step. Like that's not something you can avoid unless you have an agreement, right? Like that's kind of the natural progression in court. If you don't reach an agreement with your spouse through normal channels of negotiation or mediation, that is the necessary next step. So that's a fee that may be unavoidable. As far as like you mentioned, appraisals such as home appraisal or business appraisal, it's not mandatory that you get those things. Obviously, it's recommended, right, to be able to do exactly what you said, to make sure you have the most accurate value by an expert to be able to start or continue to engage in negotiations. But it's certainly something that the client can say, no, that's okay. I'm just going to agree with X value and move forward. And as long as they understand what they're agreeing to versus what they could be doing, I think that's okay, you know?
Yep, I agree with you 100%. Great advice. And I think this was a great conversation because preparing clients out there for what questions to even ask. This may be the first time people are hearing the word guardian ad litem, that's not something that they were otherwise familiar with or had any idea could be a cost. So it sounds like you do a nice job of explaining to the clients in an initial consultation what may or may not come up in their case. And if they're not hearing that from the attorney in an initial consultation, it's probably a cue to ask those questions. What third party or hidden costs might come about in my case? What those costs may be, even if you can just give me a range so that we as lawyers can help our clients not feel blindsided and sticker shock in the middle of a divorce case when there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns already. Let's give them the heads up so they can feel prepared, and that they can budget appropriately. So this was wonderful. Thank you so much, Nikole. As always, your insight is very valuable. So I appreciate you being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
But think that you've got the full price tag of your divorce figured out? Not so fast. Your fee structure plays a huge role in how much you will actually pay. And most people don't understand the real difference between fixed fee and hourly billing. So click here to learn how the wrong choice could cost you more than you think.